is an absolute magician. He set up for...
Hello and welcome to the Sweet 16 Postmortem for Troy Nunes' Absolute Livestream. How we doing, guys? Steve Haller, as always, with me, Christian de Guzman, and Andy Pregler.
We're just wondering if Mike Woodson knows how to coach against the zone.
Listen, we need to get the jokes out now because everybody's sad, and it's true though. If you're at Indiana, your track record against a 2-3 zone played by Syracuse in the month of March is one really, really, really good game and a whole lot of really funny jokes.
Yeah. So
Be effing smart.
So I would say, we do need to start the pod off with, if you live in a bubble, about midnight last night, Syracuse basketball was officially eliminated from the NCAA tournament. That said, I would say we were playing with house money. I would say that it was a solid overall season. And I would also say that now that it's over, we can probably dissect things a little more, which, we're kind of want to do on this show.
Yeah, I think we can start off with what we all have. I'm not going to say it's an I told you so, but all three of us in our various forms went into this tournament and said, listen, this team can be successful, but if the team does not move the ball better offensively and does not play the ball through the post more, there's no way that this team is going to be successful enough. And what we saw was Buddy Boeheim went out and said, I'm going to be Steph Curry for a weekend, and that got Syracuse through the first weekend. When Buddy Boeheim went back to Buddy Boeheim, who was still a solid ACC basketball player.
Right.
But when he's not Steph Curry, that's not enough for this team, especially against Houston. And Christian, I'm going to start with you on this because you were really beating this drum a lot all year, and Houston basically did what you had kind of mentioned a lot of teams probably should do, which is aggressively face guard Joe Girard and Buddy Boeheim, aggressively screen at the top of the zone, and Syracuse really did not seem to recover from that first 5 minutes. Even though they made it close, Houston set the tone early and never looked back.
And the unfortunate thing is that Syracuse has as I said multiple times throughout the game last night, is that Syracuse has faced this type of defense before. It was against Virginia and against Clemson, and Syracuse did pretty well against those teams. Yes, granted, it was the second time that they were facing both those teams in which Syracuse improved, but they showed that they figured out a way to beat a man defense. And it wasn't just Buddy Boeheim. It was Alan Griffin in the Clemson game. And yes, it was Buddy in the Virginia game. But they showed that the ball movement and attacking the rim was the way to break the pressure of the tight face guard style of man defense that has worked against Syracuse, especially in the beginning of the season. They didn't do any of that against Houston, and it was to their detriment because it was another return to the style of, which has frustrated me throughout this entire year, is you'll see this a lot for Syracuse. A pass will be made, and then the player will just stand there with the ball as he goes through his grocery list, thinks about what he needs to call his mom about, and then decide what he wants to do with the ball, which takes 6 seconds before the ball starts moving, and by that time, all the good options to either drive or pass the ball to facilitate the offense have just left the building. So
it seems there's two options with that. It's either, like you said, they stand there and wait for the cows to literally come home, or you see like the I don't want to use it as an example, but I'm going to something like the possession where Alan Griffin got the quick hook, where everything just went from 0 to full blast right there, and he's driving and passing to no one that's remotely open. And there's got to be some happy medium between the two.
Yeah.
Or if you're going to go full throttle, to have the rest of the team with you going full throttle.
I mean, like, because the problem with that also is that when the ball does get into Joe and Allen's hands, and then they do decide to not stand around all day and actually try and do something, they have what we've christened in the comments as Dante Green syndrome, which is if I see a shot, I'm going to take it. I don't care if a person has a hand in my face.
Right.
I am going to take said shot. And that's the problem with Joe and Allen is that they're too trigger happy with the ball, where it's okay to dribble a lot and then make a quick pass or attack the rim, which is what Syracuse wasn't doing. It was catch the ball, wait a couple seconds, and pass to the perimeter. And then that guy waits for a few seconds and then passes to the perimeter again. By that time, the defense is fully set. No lanes are open. The paint then gets clogged up because they know you're going to get desperate to attack the paint with 5 seconds left in the shot clock, and then it just collapses from there.
Yeah, and it was really, I think what Syracuse's undoing is that Houston is such a good rebounding team. Not as much on the defensive boards as they are on the offensive boards, but against a Syracuse team that is not very good at rebounding at either end of the floor, Houston's superior athleticism mindset for rebounding basically allowed a lot of those quick, bad AG or Joe Girard shots to be immediately wasted possessions. And I think that's the difference between these two players is that when Joe or Griffin is in the zone and they're hitting those shots, they can be a volume shooter because more shots will go in than not, and it ends up being a net positive even without the rebounding. But when they are off and they miss, the Syracuse is not doing anything to get the ball back, and for all of Joe's warts that he showed, he's the best rebounder outside of Q on the team when Braswell's not on the floor. And this becomes all credit to Jesse Edwards, but Jesse Edwards isn't on the floor enough that when Joe's taking a bad shot, that means that Joe can't get underneath the rim to rebound the ball. And this was really what was frustrating about the Houston game is that Syracuse would get it close, take a couple of those bad shots, and Houston would be able to regrow the lead because Syracuse wasn't able to get any second chance opportunities. And for all that went bad on the offensive end, and there was a lot that went bad, one of the few positives that I thought was, and we can kind of get into this a little bit more because this is the other big story of the game, was Jesse Edwards' play in the middle. Obviously the kid is still raw as heck, and his offensive game and finesse weren't quite there, but that guy was trying to be overpowering, trying to use his superior size. Houston didn't have anybody on their roster who was taller than 6'8". Edwards was able to kind of take advantage of just some basic height mismatches and get up some shots where he had more than one guy on him, but he was able to get the ball, it was able to hit rim, and it went in half the time, which was a lot better of a shot opportunity than I thought that play deserved.
And there were a couple moments where he showed some athleticism that he hadn't showed all year. Like, you knew he wasn't the stick in the middle type guy, but he also apparently has progressed a couple things in the over the course of the season. Just watching his play compared to the baby giraffe that we saw at the beginning of the year is absolutely immense, and to transform your entire repertoire that much in a single season really bodes well for next year, which I don't want to immediately jump the gun to next year, but his play last night, and I said it in the Slack, it was like there were some things that I really liked to see, and it really changes the outlook for next year when you have a competent 7-footer in the middle. Like, no offense to Barama, but his knees just haven't been holding up.
Yeah.
So having an option that's taller and younger and more athletic can't be a bad thing.
And if Jesse does develop that offensive game that he has shown flashes of towards the end of the season, then he probably becomes the first true good offensive center that Syracuse has had since Rakeem Christmas, which is saying a lot because it goes to an idea that I'm workshopping for an article on the site later this week that I might get out if I get the ideas right. And it's that Syracuse has a balance problem, and it's had a balance problem for the past couple of years, where the lineup either skews too much defense or too much offense. And that's what you saw last night against Houston. When Jesse was in the game, the lineup skewed too much defense. And that's what kept them in the game because Houston couldn't get shots, but Syracuse wasn't making any shots either. Now, when the lineup skews too much offense, then you don't have the right personnel to stop Houston from driving into the paint and scoring easily over Dolajai. And if the offense doesn't get rolling, that's when you see the game like you saw against Houston, because the defense actually played pretty well. I mean, Houston was under 40% from the field. That's a pretty good mark. However, when the offense doesn't get rolling, that's when the balance problems start to occur, because then you start to get worried about the defense from making Houston even worse at shooting than you are already.
And Houston was far from, a flash in the pan mid-major. Like, they were a legit team. They, I can't remember what I looked it up last night, but what they averaged per game was significantly more than what we held them to. Like, the D looked solid against a team that could score. And it wasn't, Phi Slamma Jamma, but they can put the ball in the basket. And to keep them in check as they did, it really is just a function of shot. I sound like Jim Boeheim. Shots not falling and not getting good looks, and a lot of the standard Boeheimisms really came true. If you listen to enough Boeheim press conferences, there's like a checklist of things he's gonna mention.
But
and usually he's right with them, but it's a lot of coach speak.
And the problem with that though is that he also goes back to the main reason why people are asking, why don't we see Kadari play more, or why don't we see Rasmus on a couple more stretches? It's because that Boeheim, he continued to show this last night, is that he's too loyal to Gerard and Griffin, because he saw how hot they could get last year, or in Griffin earlier this season, and he's too loyal to stick with them on the field because he knows like it just takes a couple of baskets for them to get going, which is great, but that's not a consistent way to win games, especially in a winner-take-home tournament. You can't rely on the Hail Mary prayer all the time. That can't be your go-to strategy. If that's your go-to strategy, then basically every other facet of your offense has failed. When you have a more consistent option like Kadari on the bench, who showed a great first step and a great quickness to get by the face guarding of the guards on Houston, that's when you start to fall into problems, when there's a more consistent and better option on the bench.
Right, and I think this was like my biggest takeaway from like this season as a whole, is that like we joked about it on the site, like this was the third round of the apology tour, like the bullshit double-seeded run that Syracuse makes, like this was the third edition, and this was very clearly the weakest team of any of these Syracuse runs, because to your point, Christian, even though both of those teams previously were anchored by defense, on offense, the most recent version prior to this year was the Tyus Battle year. And Tyus Battle was somebody who did not need to get hot from the outside to generate offense. He was a Kadari type who could, in that Michigan State game, when they started face guarding everybody, playing super aggressive, Tyus is going to say, I'm stronger, I'm faster than you, I'm gonna take it to the rim, and the best that you can hope to do is send me to the line where I'm a 75% shooter. That's going to be how Syracuse is going to generate offense, and that's how they beat Michigan State, a much like Houston, a superior, well-rounded overall team. In the run prior to that, the UVA Gonzaga year, that team was absolutely stacked with players who could create their own shot. Tyler Lydon at the end of the year became a force from the outside after showing that he could play in the middle of the zone or play on the wing. Malachi Richardson literally got drafted because of his NCAA tournament run. Michael Benajay was a mismatch at point guard, was like the first time Boeheim tried to do a positionless NBA. And my point is not to say that this team was bad. It's just that it was so obviously flawed. And everybody knew what that flaw was. And the reason that they were able to get to this point was because Buddy Boeheim had the opening weekend that he had. Without that Buddy Boeheim first weekend, this run doesn't happen. And that's fine, and we can have fun, and we sure as hell did have fun with it. But we can't then also turn around and say, like, oh yeah, this team was definitely better and deserved to, like, be and hang with Houston, because they didn't. And they hadn't been that all year round. Houston was a top 5 team, and the only time that Syracuse played a top 5 team was Virginia, where, again, they needed a tremendous performance from Buddy Boeheim to keep them in that game.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you can beat it to death, but last night was from tip to final whistle, Houston was the better team. And yes, there were those points where that lineup with Kadari, Big Bad Bob Braswell, who, you know, right up there in the MVP voting, just out of because we have to. But those two combined with Jesse Edwards on the defensive end, holding them in there and getting a couple shots to fall would bring them back within. You actually tied the game up in the first half, and then as soon as Jesse Edwards was put on the bench, inexplicably with 0 fouls when he's playing out of his goddamn mind, the lead is 10 at the half. What? And then opening the second half, much like Christian mentioned, the loyalty to Gerard and Griffin, you end up not starting the second half with the lineup that actually looked the best during the first half, which Houston goes on a little bit of a run out of the gates, keeps it at 12, and there we are, looking from the back seat the entire second half.
And that game also showed that, but he still has some things to work on, especially when you put an elite defender on him. Like, we got to give all credit to Dejan Giroux because he played a phenomenal game, even though he only scored 9 points. I mean, 8 assists and 8 rebounds, and then just playing absolute lockdown defense on behind the entire game is one of the main reasons why Syracuse lost as well. And it showcased, like, the main thing that Syracuse was also missing, like Andy said, they don't have a Michael Benichet, they don't have a Malachi Richardson. This team doesn't have a Tyler Ennis, a Tyus Battle. I mean, it'd be nice if this team had a Tyler Ennis. God, that'd be great. But because
he'd be coming off the bench, it'd be fine.
We talked a lot about how Buddy's driving game had improved, but it's not quite at that level yet of a Benichet or a Battle, and it showed against Rowe. And for all the flack that he gets during the tournament, Charles Barkley actually made a great point in the pre-show, where he said that Buddy almost never goes to his left, and really doesn't score when he's going towards his left. And it showed when he's trying to drive to the hoop, Charles was taking away the right, and Buddy just didn't feel comfortable on the drives to the rim, so he had to settle for contested shots, which is basically what knocked him out of his rhythm. And as we said, breaking the tight man defenses, the tight face guarding defenses, one of the best ways to do it is driving to the rim. And Buddy doesn't necessarily have the same fast first step that a Benichet or a Battle did and during their time here at Cuse yet.
Yeah, and in general, I'm gonna not try to we had a lot of fun with this. This game was really difficult. Just to watch as a fan, like the Slack, the Twitter, none of it was a great spot because this is all tough. But the season's over, and we now kind of have to move on to what's next for this team. And what's next is not very clear at the moment. We're dealing with what is basically the most loaded transfer portal that we've seen since the advent of the transfer portal. Not a very long era, but we've got teams who have the ability to bring back super seniors with no scholarship penalties because of the COVID rules. And Syracuse has a lot of players that could either stay or could go. It's the case every year, but this year there's a ton in flux. And for the first time in a while, Steve, to your point with the Jim Boeheim coach speak, we got a hell of a coach speak comment for him where he just kind of casually said that, some guys are probably going to go. I see 2 or 3. There might be more. There might be less. Who knows?
Yeah, and that's, it's nothing anybody didn't anticipate, especially with the combination of, the additional year from the COVID situation, as well as like you're saying, the transfer portal basically being open for free next year, likely, for a one-time switch. Kind of reminds me of international soccer. Like, you get your one-time switch, after that, you're toast. but there's going to be a lot of rosters around the country that are just jostled. And I think that was Boeheim just acknowledging that fact of like, I'm not going to name specifics, but people are going to be moving because people are going to be moving everywhere. And we've seen it with football. Like, there's a lot of transfer activity. Um, it's going to be the same with hoops.
And Boeheim has to, and it's a good thing that Boeheim has recognized that, but he's also got to recognize that for himself in terms of building his own roster, because as Steve said, there are a lot of good names that are going to be available during the transfer portal that should these 2 or 3 players leave Syracuse that Jim might think leave, or people in our comment section might think leave. There are options out there and quality options that could immediately slot in, especially with the free transfer waiver that is most likely getting approved by the NCAA. I mean, not to put fantasies in anyone's mind, but Kudus Wahab and Walter Kessler are already in the transfer portal. I mean, like, if you don't think Jesse's going to take the offensive leap, I mean, there's 2 options right there.
Right, and Wahab, we hit hard on the recruiting trail, if I remember right.
We actually did. So there's options there if you don't think Jesse's going to take the step forward. And remember, Boeheim has had success with transfers before. I mean, Elijah Hughes, already went to the NBA because of his time at Syracuse. Andrew White and John Gillen got some G League time because of their transfers to Syracuse, and all 3 of those guys had significant contributions to the Orange during their time here in Central New York. So the transfer portal wasn't something that Boeheim should be scared of, especially when you consider that, and you remember that there's only one recruit coming to Central New York in the 2021 class, in Benny Williams. And as great as a lot of people think he's going to be, that's still only one recruit. And we saw throughout this entire tournament and throughout this entire golden run that Syracuse had in March, how important that bench is going to be, even if Jim Boeheim is still bullish on playing guys 40 minutes a game.
Yeah, that bench that you kind of mentioned, I think it's safe to say that next year's roster is going to include probably 2 or 3 transfers, maybe 4, depending on how many players leave and how many scholarship spots end up being available. It's just going to kind of be a crapshoot from here. But we can say that Jesse Edwards has definitely played himself into some significant minutes next year, especially like if he takes the offseason to get stronger, not necessarily putting on weight, but just get a little bit stronger going up to the rim and making himself an authority. And same with Robert Braswell. Like, that kid, he's the Nunes mascot at this point in time, but he was able to knock down threes. He was doing some solid rebounding work. Like, his trajectory is looking pretty solid right now. Maybe he's not the starting 3 or 4 next year. Again, we don't really know what Benny Williams' situation is going to be. We're assuming that he's probably going to be the starting 3. Maybe that changes. We're going to have to. It's Boeheim. You never know what's going to happen with freshmen. It's going to be the offseason. But this roster and this run is going to kind of live in its own moment, and next year's team is going to be its own unique beast.
Yeah, and you've got, I mean, if you look at eligibility, I think we, especially with the message from Marek's parents and all that, I think it's well safe to say that Marek is not going to opt for his 5th year because of the COVID situation. However, you do have a lot of flux with Griffin, with Guerrier, with the entire rest of the front court, be it, the bench guys that didn't get time, the guys that did start to get some run. Everything's going to be in flux, and I think it's going to be a while until we see how that all shakes out. And then you have another forward coming in Williams. So,
and then
how this is all going to work out.
And then that goes back to my initial point that I started this all off with, is the decision of balance for Boeheim's teams, because again, we've seen a shift of balance, not just in this lineup in the past game, but throughout the entire past couple of years also. I mean, this year the balance was swung more towards offense. In 2018, the balance was swung more towards defense. Boeheim really hasn't had a happy medium where you can trust guys on both sides of the coin, and he's going to have to find a roster that he can do that with in order to get back up in the ACC.
Yeah, it's been 9 years since it wasn't a flip flop on that 2012 team.
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm.
So, speaking of teams that are definitely going to look different next year, women's basketball got UConn, which we all knew it from the onset of that bracket getting released. Sarah and Howard both kind of warned us that that would be the worst case scenario. It happened. The team played as well as they could have against a UConn team, but unless they all suddenly became Steph Curry from three, there was no way that Cuse was going to win that game. The season ends. Tiana Mahakahia gets her send off. She went viral for her post game comments. Very emotional moment from her. And then she announces that she's going to enter the WNBA draft process. There is no combine this year, so not sure if she's going to be able to like do a private workout that she zooms to scouts to kind of show it, because she admitted that she was not at 100% this year. Her body is still adjusting to post treatment life athletically. So what she is as a pro is going to look a lot different than what she showed this year, and she's going to try and prove that. But furthermore, the big news that nobody saw coming was Emily Ensletter, the sixth player of the year for the ACC, shared that award with another person, but for Syracuse purposes, we celebrated the crap out of that. She announced that she's transferring. Boom. There's a lot of speculation about why that is. We're not going to dive into that, other than Q admitted in the tweet that they are a little bit of oil and water. So there's obviously there's a backstory there that we'll probably get in a wonderful piece written by Howard or Sarah or whoever gets to speak to Emily at the once she's made her decision. But with all the players leaving, with Emily transferring, women's basketball went from like, hey, we're gonna have Emily, Camilla, and a bunch of who knows to we're gonna have Camilla and a bunch of who knows.
And if you're
that sounds.
If you're Syracuse women's basketball, that might be all you need. Question mark.
Right. That's going to be a question. I mean, we get Priscilla Williams will be healthy again, but you lose the entire backcourt. Like, I don't know. They do have another solid recruiting class coming in, so it's not. There's not another Cardoso, but there's I think 3 top 100 prospects. So they're gonna have some core to build around. I think it is official that 2 of the 4 players that were suspended at the end of the year also have entered the portal. In what is it? Faith Blackstone and one other, I believe, officially had transferred or entered their names in the portal. Again, as always, when we're talking about this transfer stuff, you can enter the name in your name in the portal and then withdraw, much like Stephen Rafis did with lacrosse. So it's not like they're gone, but it seems like people are pursuing options around wherever they are. So I guess we'll see. I mean, again, another women's basketball team gets UConn. So
and Q's also
here
and as much as Baylor missed to answer a question about balance, Q's also going to have to answer a question about balance, because as good as Camilla Cardoso is, this is Coach Quentin Hillsman we're talking about, and the only thing that Quentin Hillsman loves more than his bow tie collection is his players shooting a million threes in every single game, which is not something that you might want to consider when you have a 6'7" dominant center in women's basketball. So that's going to be an interesting decision to make when he's retooling the team, and he has to retool the team in the transfer portal.
Yeah,
which they did receive a transfer incoming.
Yes,
right?
yes, they did.
I was going to say someone's got the
USC. Yeah, USC transfer Shalia Aaron.
Yes, she is the prototypical Q transfer where she set the world on fire from 3, and it's not that she can't do anything else, but like that was a very specific skill set of hers. And for Q, he has made a living off of filling out the Syracuse roster with a lot of these players, and some of them, as we kind of saw with Emily Colombe. I mispronounced her first name, and I'm very sorry, but she was from Rhode Island. She was a 3-point specialist point guard. Didn't really get a lot of a run, even though her transfer was kind of big news. But she's starting for the Dominican Republic in FIBA qualifiers right now. Like he does a good job of finding like players with high upside, but whether they work in the Syracuse system or not is kind of a we're gonna have to wait and see, because the way that Q runs the team is so unique. And again, Christian, to your point, it seems like he's trying to figure out a way to get some balance in there, so that way teams are not just crashing 5 around Camilla every time because they know that's where the pass is going to go. We saw it in the early part of the UConn game. I texted Steve this. I was like, they finally listened to you, where every single play was just throw the ball really high, hope Camilla can grab it or tip it in.
Yep. And she was.
Yeah, but yeah. And again, unfortunately, that's what led to turnovers that allowed UConn to get into the advantage that they did eventually win the game by.
Yeah. And once they start running and gunning, you're
not going to win with
I guess. Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. And shots weren't falling.
And then Paige Beckers is really good.
Yes. Did you see that no look, like under the basket pass?
She's really good at basketball.
Yep.
Yeah, sometimes talent just is gonna win you games. I like it. Some basketball is 5 people on each side on the court. Sometimes the most talented player is just able to win you a game. Speaking of that, 8 years ago to this day, the more talented Syracuse Orange was able to make Tom Crean forget the basic principles of the 2-3 zone and made Connor in Indianapolis so sad he started a t-shirt company that eventually had to get Syracuse on board. Home Field Apparel is our sponsor, as always, of this show. Connor, that one was just for you. They had decided to drop a new Syracuse design. I didn't think I'd be saying that this early into the deal, but if you bug them enough on Twitter, they will make new Syracuse gear. They made a new t-shirt for us. It is their gray t-shirt base, but it's a classic Syracuse retro design. It's that old Block S, the OG white Block S that Syracuse had very early on in its days, which I always think it's funny that Penn State has now tried to reclaim that logo, even though I think there was probably 15 schools using that Block S design at one point in time.
Yeah, that'd be like NC State, Syracuse, and Stanford all filing lawsuits against each other for who's going to use that Block S.
It's that one Office meme, the standoff office meme.
I love that meme so much because it always comes up in the tournament too with Syracuse and Cinderella teams. If you want that t-shirt, if you want more Syracuse t-shirts, if you want to get a Loyola t-shirt for some reason, like Dan Lyons did, you can go and use the promo code Nunes10 for 10% off your entire order. But for those of you who are watching live right now, you have just a few hours left to use the promo code SWEET for 16% off your entire order. See what they did there? But that offer expires midnight Sunday night. So you got to be watching now if you want to take advantage of that promo. Which
I should probably look at the site.
You have 3.5 hours.
I'm just letting everybody know that promo is live and well, and it is. Yeah, that is. I might have done that last night when I was sad. So, speaking of more sad things. Men's lacrosse played Duke. Christian, you have been telling Steve and I that this is the game to watch, that this is the game that men's lacrosse has had circled on their calendars all year round. It happened, and Syracuse men's lacrosse added to the collection of L's taken by the university this weekend.
It was close. It was a really good game. If you only watched the first half, it didn't seem close. So let's run through some numbers quick. Duke 7, Syracuse 1 in the first quarter. Duke 9, Syracuse 3 in the second quarter. 3-3 in the third quarter, and then Duke 5, Syracuse 1 in the fourth quarter. That was the face-off advantage for Duke throughout the entire game.
Oof. Ow.
Doesn't seem ideal, and that's essentially where this game was lost because Syracuse actually had some advantages against Duke. I say advantages lightly because the offense was still looking good for Syracuse. They ran off, I believe it was a 7-0 run at one point to tie the game after Jacob Fopp just got demolished on faceoffs, and then Danny Varello came in and actually did a pretty good job. But Duke won 24 to 32 faceoffs. For people who aren't that great at math, that's 75% of the faceoffs. That's not going to win you a lacrosse game if you don't have for the men's lacrosse team. And while the turnovers were a little bit of an issue for the men in the first half, it flipped in the second half where the defense was forcing Duke into turnovers instead of the offense getting into turnovers when they had their limited chances at the ball, and that showed in the final tally where, again, after unfortunately Duke walloped Syracuse in the second quarter with their face-off advantage and scored 8 goals. It was 4 goals to 1 in the third, and then 3 goals to 2 in the second, all in favor of Cuse. So the game was really, really close. If you haven't seen the game-tying Chase Scanlon goal when they tied the game at 13, you have to go see it because that's one of the best goals you'll see in college lacrosse right now. But this was a close game, and Syracuse had the ball with I believe it was 40 seconds left, and they went man up. And it was a close man up. They just couldn't get the shot correct on goal. And Syracuse hasn't had a lot of man up opportunities, unfortunately, this year, so it probably isn't as cohesive as a unit as they'd like to be. But they had their chances, and this game was pretty close. I mean, it's a 1-goal game against Duke, number 2 team in the country, who have 2 top 5 picks on their roster right now, and Michael Sowers and JT Childs Harris, the top freshman in the country, and Brendan O'Neill. This was a good team that Syracuse took to the wire, and Syracuse will feel upset about losing this game because they had the chance to tie it and even a chance to win it at points. But this isn't as bad as a loss that probably some people are thinking, because there's a lot of good positives to take away from this game. Chase Scanlon getting crucial goals against a good team, where usually Scanlon only does well against the Binghamtons and Colgates of the world. But I think he had 4 goals against Duke, which was very good. Stephen Rafis had an excellent game. And those two needed to show up, because I mentioned JT Giles Harris. He was on Owen Hiltz the entire game. And that's why Owen Hiltz didn't do too much. He was only held to 3 points. But the fact that JT Giles Harris, a senior and a projected top 5 pick in the draft coming up in the PLL, was on Owen Hiltz, a freshman, shows a lot of respect that Duke was paying to Hiltz. And that should only make Cuse fans excited, because he's going to be a factor to come. And as long as Scanlon and Rafis have the same type of games that they did, this will be a good Syracuse lacrosse team. There are things to fix, obviously, face-offs being the big one. That's why I led off with it. Yep. But it was a good game for Syracuse, and unfortunately they just fell just short.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things I wanted to get to you with, Christian, is that this Duke team is insanely good. So the loss isn't necessarily bad, but walk, maybe for me, maybe for others, the uninitiated through the fact that this might not be the last time that Syracuse sees this Duke team. They could potentially play 2 more times if certain things.
Unfortunately, only 1 more time, and that would be in an NCAA tournament, because COVID scheduling. There's no ACC tournament this year.
Oh,
so this is why Syracuse, has a kind of a wonky schedule as well, and they play 2 ACC schools twice. Luckily for Syracuse, if you want to get wins, they're the 2 quote-unquote weaker teams in the ACC, and there aren't really a weak team in the ACC right now. So you're kind of happy and kind of we have to play another ACC school. They have to play Notre Dame twice, and then they have to play Virginia twice. And Virginia just picked up a massive win over Notre Dame this past weekend. Virginia might finally be getting back on form after the shellacking Syracuse gave them back in the second weekend of the season for Syracuse. And Notre Dame has arguably the top defense, not just in the ACC, but probably the entire college lacrosse world right now. So that's going to be tested for Syracuse. But I believe if my schedule reading is correct, Syracuse might not get a great break. No, they do get Notre Dame next, and then Albany. Albany's having a kind of a rough year. Then April 17th is the next date to circle at the Carrier Dome, UNC, where Syracuse just had to deal with Notre Dame and Michael Sowers. And Mitch Wyckoff had to. Poor Mitch Wyckoff played a good game against Michael Sowers, but like Sowers took him to town on some cases, and Syracuse had to really decide if they were going to let Wyckoff deal with him one-on-one or bring a slide. And if they brought a slide on a double team, then Sowers just made an easy pass for an easy goal, which kind of ruined Syracuse in the first half. They have to deal with Chris Gray now, who is battling Sowers for that Terrell Turner Award, the Heisman equivalent of college lacrosse. So that's who Syracuse is waiting for in the Carrier Dome on April 17th.
Yeah, that's going to be one to circle, like you said.
Yeah, I'm not I'm not super pessimistic, but man, this is men's lacrosse. If they end this season with only the losses that they have at this moment, that's a tremendous accomplishment because god damn, this team is really good.
Let's go through the schedule. There are 6 games left on the men's lacrosse schedule right now. Hopefully they all get played. 5 of them are against ranked opponents. And the only one that's not against the ranked opponent is the last game of the season against Utah.
Oof.
Notre Dame, Albany, North Carolina, Virginia, Notre Dame, Utah. And those second two games against Virginia and Notre Dame on the road.
Love that.
That's not great.
The Notre Dame game next week is going to be very interesting because Syracuse's first midfield line, as lauded as it is, hasn't performed extremely well the past couple of games. It's really been the attack that's carried them against Holy Cross and Duke. And
right, which looking back to your season preview was exactly the opposite of what everybody expected.
So the fact that the first midfield line didn't do anything and the attack did everything in those last 2 games is interesting. And we'll see if that script flips against Notre Dame because, again, if the first midfield line can get going the same way that the attack got going, like that's going to create matchup problems for Notre Dame's scary defense.
What's I was gonna add. Sorry, Steve, you can go ahead.
Oh no, I go for it. If you're staying on topic.
No, my I guess my question is at this point, like this is what Steve can probably correct me here. This is probably the 3rd or 4th time that Christian has explained to us that face-offs have cost men's lacrosse or made a game more difficult for men's lacrosse.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Is this going to get fixed, or is this just another year where men's lacrosse is going to get killed on face-offs, and they're going to have to find a way to counteract that if they want to like make the jump and make a Final Four championship game?
Yes and no, because yes, face-offs need to get fixed because, I mean, we don't want Chris Dandio at face-off X again. I mean, God help us all. But you got to also remember that this is a new era for face-offs in college lacrosse, like I explained at the beginning of the season. For those of you who are tuning in, don't know what the rule change was. Before in college lacrosse, you could place a knee on the ground and place your hands like this on the stick, and then face off with the stick while keeping a knee on the ground while scrumming for the ball. Now you have to take the hand that's closest to the head of your stick and you invert it, and you can't place a knee on the ground no matter what when you're in the scrim with the other face-off guy. So those critical changes to the face-offs are benefiting one guys and not benefiting other guys. And it's really showing that it's a real tic-tac-toe and like swinging game in terms of momentum, in terms of how guys actually, win face-offs. And so like FOP has had 3 really good games and 2 really bad games. So
yeah, I can only imagine you take all these established Fogos that are, used to X and completely change how they have to do it. It's like, some of them aren't going to be quite as good as they used to.
It's good, and it's showing that it's going to fluctuate from game to game. I mean, like, remember, like I said, with Virginia. Virginia's face-off guy was the leading guy in face-off percentage coming into the Syracuse game, and then FOP, won over 60% of the face-offs. So it feels like these rules are just a swing of momentum from game to game. And no one really knows yet what gives guys an advantage on the face-off X yet because of these new unique rules.
Right. Well, speaking of rules that make no sense because I can't wrap my head around them and teams continuing to make a run, the women just got off a 2-week hiatus and decided to take Virginia Tech to the cleaners 17-10. Gary Gates doing good things with this team.
This was another confusing game because if I remember correctly, I think this score was tied at 7.5.
Yes, it was closer than it should have been, and Syracuse was in danger of getting shut out this week, which very rarely happens when lacrosse season is in session.
So that's good, and at least they got the win. And now comes the game that everyone wants to see.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is now the women have the game that we've been talking about for the last 4 weeks.
So again, let's set this up for you. Shout outs to the guys at Lacrosse Reference for this. A couple of weeks ago, I'm not sure how the numbers have changed. Syracuse in women's lacrosse had the number 2, was ranked number 2 in offensive efficiency and ranked number 4 in defensive efficiency. Really good. North Carolina is ranked number 1 in both offense and defensive efficiency in women's lacrosse.
Yeah, about that. This is going to be a
This
battle.
is going to be a battle.
I definitely am going to have to tune into this one. Provided, a 3-year-old and large puppy allow said viewing.
Yeah, I'm literally pulling up right now. I'm trying to see if this game has already been confirmed. I'm assuming that it's going to be on ACC Network because the ACC Network has done a good job of putting those games on TV.
Yeah, ACC Network is going to carry this game. It's going to be at Chapel Hill.
Saturday at 11 a.m. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, John's not
Nothing
good.
like a preferred
John
kickoff
will
or
watch the game
tip-off
because he
or
wakes up
face-off
at
right there.
ridiculous hours. But
yeah, a Saturday. This is a pre-nooner. Man, the women are getting the football treatment with the pre-nooners here.
Oh, this is going to get confusing. Yeah. We're going to have to double screen on Saturday because the men's game starts at 12 on ESPNU.
I love ACC schedules. Love it.
So you've got 1 versus 2 on the women's side.
And right now, 4 versus 6.
Who are at 11 on ACC Network.
Yep.
And 4 versus 6 on the men's side on ESPNU.
Yeah. This is going to be a good weekend.
I appreciate it for all those out there. Listen, you can do your brunch in the backyard and put lacrosse on the double screens. This is what Syracuse fans needed after, gut punch in the Sweet 16.
So, for the record, if you don't know it, Apple TV allows you to multicast ESPN. So, I think all their ESPN apps do. So, I'm definitely going to be pulling up 1 and 2 on the TV this weekend. That'll be good.
Now, the only thing that would make this weekend better would be a spring football game for Syracuse, but that's not confirmed yet.
Oh, Christian,
that'll happen someday.
Good at these transitions. It's almost like you went to a really good broadcasting school or something.
Yeah, I went across the road. That's why I suck at transitions. I stare at trees and water all day.
I went to the IT school as well as the broadcasting school, so that's why I'm mediocre at best. But case in point, murdering this transition. Let's talk about football.
Yeah, Christian really tossed that up like a soft toss to you, and you just went.
I was embodying this Pittsburgh Pirates hat that I had, and I just made sure that we went to the bottom of the barrel real quick. Baseball starts on Thursday, guys. Let's talk about what happened in football this week, because this is admittedly my weak spot of the year. Unless the recruit is coming from Western Pennsylvania, I really don't have a ton of info on things. But I'm trying to make sure that we got this right, because we have heard rumors of recruits coming, and Steve has written some articles about. Did you write any of the confirmed ones, or did you write the rumored ones?
I wrote the Malachi Davis one. Christian handled the Belizaire Brissett.
Okay, great.
So,
first of all, Belizaire Brissett. Great name.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Christian, let's start with you, so that way, as is the tradition on this live show, we can end with offensive line talk.
No, that's a defensive end talk.
Both are defensive.
The offensive line was the rumored that it's shoved off to the side.
Okay. But both are defensive line, which are really important because, remember, Syracuse had 4 defensive linemen transfer this offseason. So, Syracuse needs reinforcements on the defensive line. So, getting Brissett and Davis, while not the primary ones that Syracuse would have most likely like coveted the most. Like they're still good ads. Bassett is from American Heritage High School, the same high school that Aronde Gassetin, the 2021 wide receiver, is coming from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So a good high school program that he's coming from, and you'd be remiss if you'd be okay if you mistook him for Chris Elmore because he's got a very similar frame at 6'2", 270. Like so that it's almost shockingly similar to a Chris Elmore type frame, and he actually showed like some pretty good quickness on from what I saw in his tape of shedding the blocks from guards. He's a D tackle, and he did pretty well against the guards in Florida and working on the inside to get to the backfield and get to the quarterback or the ball handlers. So that's pretty good.
So he's going to inherit the Chris Elmore play every position role, or just the I'm a bowling ball that's really athletic?
I think the bowling ball that's really, really athletic, I think will be very, very nice to see.
I absolutely, that may be my favorite, like, stereotypical football player body type is, like, way too athletic for what you're, like, the weight you're carrying, and it's always amazing.
See, speaking of baseball talk, those are called catchers, except they are usually sub 6 feet, although that's slightly changing. But I do appreciate that your height basically determines whether or not you're a baseball catcher or football defensive end.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, baseball catcher at this
point
is, are you willing to sacrifice your knees for the rest of your life?
Well, let's...
Yeah, that's also called offensive
I was
line.
going to say, Steve, yeah, how are those ACLs handling that at this age?
They're wonderful.
Are they day one Blair type ACLs or?
Well, one's still intact.
Oh man, Christian, that one almost got me. I had Day One Blair is a name that, again, Pittsburgh connections abound here. That is a name that was so emblazed into my head in the early looking at college days. My dad, love him to death. Little bit ticked off that I decided to go to Syracuse after he placed the deposit for me to go to Pitt. And he decided,
We're glad you're
so
here.
he decided that for the length of my Syracuse career, he was going to keep track of the Syracuse Pitt head-to-head records in all sports. And spoiler alert, Syracuse did not do well in head-to-heads against Pitt while I was at school, and Blair was a big part of that reason.
Yeah. It's always funny to like that. There's always that Pitt guy from every era.
Mm-hmm.
When I remember it, it was Carl goddamn Krauser.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a name.
Carl Krauser he seemed like he played there for 17 years, and he killed Cuse every time they played.
This is going to be the next time that we have a Pitt basketball lead-in, like where Syracuse is playing Pitt on Saturday and they don't have a game, and their previous game is like a Monday or a Wednesday or whatever. We are totally doing that Pitt guy as an article topic.
Yes.
Because between you, John, James, Kevin, like, man, there are so many that Pitt guys.
Yep.
Anyways, we have completely gone off the rails. We didn't even talk about the other defensive line prospect. Steve, who else did we...
That would be defensive end Malachi Davis. Not that Malachi, but another Malachi joining. 2022, as mentioned, 3-star defensive end from Michigan, literally right outside MSU. He's from Holt, which is apparently a suburb of Lansing. So he's 6'5", 245. So a solid frame, ready to pack on a couple of pounds. He looks, as Christian said, you can take what you can from Huddle. I always love including them in our previews, but it's like you're always watching the best guy on the field. So it's like you take what you can from it. Technique-wise, he looked pretty solid. So he had offers coming in from Louisville, Vanderbilt, Tulane, Air Force, and just about all the MAC. So the fact that Louisville and Vanderbilt were in on it, as well as the Green Wave, just because they're the Green Wave, bodes well. Like he's a solid player. We'll see what ends up happening, how he develops. I mean, this might be also a guy that we got in on early, since he is a 22 commit and has a whole other year to play. So we'll see where that goes. And he's definitely more the defensive end frame, but the way it ends up falling, you've got two guys that have committed already, so you're backfilling for those four. You can kind of get a little riskier with the other. Um, like Christian had mentioned, Syracuse is still in the hunt for some of the higher prospects. They missed on a couple, but some of their main targets, like you can now that you've got two in the barn, you can kind of go after them a little harder. And if you fall short, you don't you're not losing the house on it.
Yeah, I
So
I think that, and this was something else that we saw a lot in this last recruiting cycle. We're seeing it again in this current cycle, where the 3-star guys that Syracuse are getting are not the 3-star guys that are only MAC offers.
right,
There's a lot more players choosing Syracuse who have a lot of other Power 5 offers. And that's not to say that, like, that doesn't mean that they're magically, like, oh, going to turn into a 4-star at some point in time. It just means that we've kind of gone from picking at the bottom of the barrel to we're picking along with the rest of the other schools that need 3 stars, because that's most of the Power 5. Um, which I feel like is, for all the things that people want to give Babers crap about, it takes a while to rebuild recruiting. Like, recruiting is not something that changes magically overnight. It takes a very long period of time of consistent scouting and networking and building relationships. I feel like Dino and his staff, for all the turnover that they've had, they finally have turned the corner on that recruiting side. And yes, we might not have had the high ends. We've missed out on a lot of them so far. We're still doing a really good job of getting competitive 3 stars. We're in on a lot of 4-star guys that fit the Syracuse profile. And now we've seen some of those 4-star guys. Looking at Cisco was a 3 who everybody said should have been a 4. Trill was another fringe guy. Like, they're in the NFL draft and they're expected to go in like the first couple of days. Like, this is
yeah.
the pipeline that you then show to other recruits and say, like, listen, you're good. We'll get you better and get you to the NFL.
I mean, I've mentioned a couple times, but Syracuse is only ever this is in modern recruiting history, has only had 15 4 and 5-star recruits. They've had 2 5-stars and 13 4-stars, and that's since 2000. So it's not like everyone that complains about the 3-stars, that's literally what there is to work with. Like, I'll literally run them down. Cecil Howard and Johnny Morant were the 5-stars. Okay. Cecil Howard transferred. Johnny Morant had a solid career. Diamond Ferry, Andre Baskin, Avery Collier, Wayne Morgan, Marcus Spriel, Larry McLean, LeVar Lobdell, Adam Rosner, KJ Williams, Marcus Sales, Ron Thompson, Trill Williams, Tommy DeVito. That's it. That's every one of them. And yes, Cuse 181, I have a goddamn spreadsheet. but like it boggles my mind because everyone complains that all we get is 3-stars, and it's like that's all there is for non SEC and top tier schools.
Yeah.
Like if you're recruiting players, most of what you're recruiting is finding the better 3-stars.
Yeah, and I feel like we're making that jump. I know, Christian, you've done a lot of the work at like looking at the huddle, but like a perfect example of this is like Josh Hugh. Josh is his first name, out of
Yep.
Pittsburgh, where he played in like one of the lower ends of the Pittsburgh high school totem pole, so therefore he's going to be overlooked. But the numbers he put up were so outworldly that other schools kind of noticed, but Syracuse was in on him early due to like that really solid scouting. He was kind of a bottom barrel 3-star, and he moved his way up to being one of the better 3-star recruits that Syracuse was able to ink on signing day this past year. And
yeah, I think like that's only going to get better as Syracuse goes on, because like you're starting to see like development is starting to become a big like factor in like how Syracuse gets better, and we're starting to see it with the defensive backs. I mean, how many times have we talked about Nick Monroe and the job that he's done, especially not just on the recruiting side, but also on the defensive back side, where he's one of the key guys who's developing. Like having those type of guys in your program to like I'm in the revenue, and you see it in the tweets. Monroe's always the first guy to get excited about the guy that's committed. So like,
Yep.
like gaining that type of momentum and like And as you said, beating out some of these other Power 5 programs, like the SEC had offers from Illinois, Iowa State, Pitt, Texas A&M, and Vanderbilt. So, like, that's a good offer sheet to beat out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and
I think we're seeing a lot more of that lately, too.
And for Syracuse, like you said, like, unless you're turning the sliders all the way down on NCAA football, like, that's the best you can do right now, at least. Like, you'll slow, like, it's going to be, if you want to consistently get 4 and 5 stars, you have to slowly build your way up. And, like, this is the way you have to do it.
Yep. And it's not a sexy process, but we've been with Babers now long enough that we're starting to see the fruits of that labor. And I think, not to get too in the weeds on this, and like we'll leave this for another day because football season is still, maybe next week when we all meet, there'll be a spring football day. Probably not, but maybe. We can start looking at this football season ahead. Getting rid of Dino, a lot of people are going to want to put him on the hot seat because of his record. A lot of people are going to say that what his record is this year is going to determine whether or not he gets fired. I'm going to put my hat in the ring and say record doesn't mean everything because there's a lot of moving pieces at Syracuse. And I think that outside of last year's wins and losses record, everything else was trending up for him. And it's really hard to move on from a guy like that and nail the next hire. So.
And before the first comment is, but Dino was at Hinkle this weekend. Clearly, he doesn't care about his football team.
He got 2 recruits while being at Hinkle. Clearly, he could do that.
And, dead period is dead period, so here we are.
Yeah, dead period is dead period, and they're still doing work. So, you know what? That's how this goes.
Right. When you can't actually get in front of recruits, being in Hinkle's going to be he's getting national TV exposure being in Hinkle, so.
Listen, 3D checkers here. Steve, Christian, another solid hour-long conversation about Syracuse sports. Even though it started a little bit on the sad note, we were able to go some fun places. This has, as always, our NunesMagician live show is still clicking as we transition into now firmly what is lacrosse season, firmly what is football off-season topics. And if you stuck with us this far, thank you so much. If you stuck with us if this is your first time watching this show, great. I hope you keep watching, even though it's going to get a little bit weird. But we're going to have fun. We hope you have fun. And for the rest of the NunesMagician crew that is putting out great content on the site, you're definitely going to want to check it out. I'm sure that we'll have a bunch of retrospectives done by John, Kevin, James, the people that, watch these sports and have feelings. And then, it's going to be... Just because the season's over does not mean we're going to stop churning out articles because people got stuff to say.
I did also forget, now that we're on YouTube, we actually get, real-time comments in that. So we did have one question, which came in from former Adirondack Central, my alma mater, basketball coach Nick Pelzak. How come Monroe never gets a crack at D coordinator?
Ooh.
And I think White's kind of going to be in that spot for a while, and I think one of the biggest things is going to be shifting Monroe, and we may not hear anything formally, but we've kind of posited on it a couple times of moving him into that associate head coach role, where you gain those duties. Maybe he's already kind of the recruiting coordinator, but maybe it's a more formal situation, and also a nice pay bump to keep him on staff because Monroe should probably stay on staff for all of our sanity. So, that's definitely one of those things where it's like we need to retain him.
Well,
so
I was going to ask you, Steve, about this. Like, we've kind of talked about, not to get us into a 30-minute tangent here, but...
Oh, we'll be there.
Yeah, we kind of talked about that role. Syracuse football never officially appointed a new associate head football coach. Right. And that might be something that we don't see until the spring game, when we see who's the coach who's actually rounding up all the players, who's doing a lot of those Lustig-type roles. But I would say Monroe would make the most sense because that's how you get him the pay bump necessary to ensure that the guy recruits Florida really well. And if you're Miami or you're Florida State, like, you do not want to be losing Florida recruits to Syracuse. Not that that's happened very often, but it's not like either of those schools are doing so well right now that they can afford to have somebody like that at a competitor school.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So we'll see where that all lines out. I think once we start seeing the like whenever they post the depth chart, they'll probably have something with the coaching staff, tied into that, or update the website soon after they post that as to who's in what role officially. And we do have redundancy at defensive back with White being the D coordinator who can also take on some of those roles. So
yeah,
I think we'll get a little more clarity as time goes on.
And spring practice is scheduled to start on March 30th. So on Tuesday, we might be finally getting some of those answers, which I'm pretty sure we'll talk about for way too long next week.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
100%.
The best part about next week's show is that we will be able to, it'll be Easter Sunday, anniversary of the Gonzaga game, the Virginia game. Well, not the actual date, but Easter Sunday was when the UVA game happened.
The actual date was yesterday, and
hi, Carolyn. But
shout out to Carolyn for tweeting out, "How can you not love Buddy Boeheim?" That was just excellent.
We've broken her. We have broken her. But then the other part is that yes, we will have Stephen Bailey's initial football breakdown, whatever media access they can get. Stephen is going to take the most advantage of it, and we will all reap the benefits.
Yep.
All right, so not only have that, and everyone's also going to expect that basketball transfers are going to happen at some point next week. So it's going to be a loaded episode, even though it is a lax season right now.
Yeah.
I got a hunch we'll find a good, solid way to keep talking for way too much time in the off season.
And if not, it will just be Andy and I overreacting to the Pirates and the Yankees.
Also true.
Yep. It's going to be...
And me trying to get back into baseball.
Here's my Josh...
I made that commitment this year.
Josh Bell!
Yeah, now national. This is the problem with buying Pirates merch. It doesn't stay good for very long. It's my fidget that I have over here, so that way I'm not clicking away on my keyboard and causing audio issues for Steve. With that note, that's our show. Ladies and gentlemen, and everybody else who's watching, thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of Troy Nunes is an Absolute Livecast. For Christian, for producer Steve, and...
Again... We're on YouTube. Make sure you like and subscribe.
Yes.
Do the whole 9 yards.
Yes, we got to come up with a really.
We got to come up with an outro now.
And if you have subscribed, make sure you ring that bell and get notifications so that you know when we post. And you can tell that I'm the one who has spent the most time on YouTube out of all three of us.
Millennial or Gen, whatever the thing post millennial.
I'm like on the cusp.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm a millennial.
Like I'm on the cusp of like the line between millennial and Gen Z, and it's awkward.
I was gonna say you could be the Gen Z because I'm the millennial, and then Steve hits. I think Steve's actually at the millennial cut.
I'm technically at the top end of millennial.
There we go.
Like I'm at the bottom end of millennial, and like maybe, but depending on who you talk to, the top end of Gen Z.
Actually, I think now that you do that way, we can be the 3 tiers of millennials and just tick everybody off.
Oh yeah, that sounds right.
And this is why you should like and subscribe here on the NunesMagician YouTube page and get that notification bell on so you're notified when we go live for all of these Troy Nunes is an Absolute Livecast shows.
I couldn't have said it better than that.
What he said.
I've watched too many YouTube videos to know how those work.
On that note, folks, go Orange.